I'm Campbell McLaughlin, Goonhammer's resident weeaboo, and today we'll be reviewing the starter set for Freecompany's fantasy skirmish game, Eldfall Chronicles. Before we get started, we'd like to thank Freecompany for providing us with a review copy of the Eldfall Chronicles Coalition of Thenian vs. Sand Kingdom starter set. If you'd like to read more about Eldfall Chronicles, including a written review, head on over to goonhammer.com. Link in the description. Now you're probably wondering what an Eldfall is and why one would be chronicling it. Eldfall Chronicles is a skirmish wargame set in Kalad, a fantasy world defined less by endless war and more by high adventure. Players can assemble their parties, pit them against each other in competitive play, fight monsters in cooperative games, or even play solo. There are 4 main factions. The Empire of Soga is a militaristic faction, inspired by feudal Japan and modeled after samurai. They're less about magic and more about brute strength, but have some tricksy kitsune allies to help with that. The Helion League are a proud, noble faction of Rin, which are essentially this setting's take on elves. They're about as lawful good as they come, with plate mail and flame magic giving them a paladin feel. The Coalition of Thenian is the counterpart to the Helion League. Instead of worshipping the sun and working together for the greater good, these Rin are rowdy and unruly, worshipping the moon and partying in their underground cities. Their use of magic is more about augmenting their strength than throwing fireballs. They're definitely doing the dark elf succubus thing. Last is the Kingdom of Sand, a cosmopolitan civilization built on the ruins of the previous one. They're a magical meritocracy who value spellcraft above all else, with the highest in their social order being the most powerful arcanists. As you might expect from the name, their aesthetic is inspired by Persian and Egyptian imagery, and their playstyle is all about magic. There are also neutral mercenaries and monsters to contend with, but that should give you the basics. There's a ton of lore here. Every model has at least a few paragraphs of backstory, with more being added all the time, so there's plenty to sink your teeth into if you want to dive in. This particular box is pretty packed, like a nesting doll of beautiful package design. The graphic design is my passion part of my brain was lighting up like a Christmas tree. There's a compact, full-color rulebook, a sheet of tokens to punch out, a distressingly loose water elemental model, both warbands in their respective boxes, unit cards, and some bespoke D20s for our warbands, with faction symbols on the ones. This is one of those things that make this set feel like a really premium product instead of just having some generic dice in there. Let's focus on the models for a minute, since they're honestly what I'm here for. The aesthetic is very JRPG inspired. Even the package design evokes old Final Fantasy box art. The models might be a smidge cheesecakey for some, but that can vary based on the faction, with some very Dark Souls looking armored minis out there. The models are unassembled resin, so you'll want to superglue them together. I always find it best to let resin minis soak in warm soapy water for a couple hours, then gently brush them with a toothbrush to get off any molder-release agent or residue. This particular resin is one of the bendier materials I've worked with, so when you clean them off, be real gentle, and keep some hot water available for bending pieces back into position. They're bigger than a lot of minis out there, sitting in the 32 to 40mm range. The details on these are crisp as hell, and I expect to see them in painting competitions on the regular. There's no included instructions for assembly, so you'll want to download those from the website, take a picture, or otherwise figure out which pieces go with which miniatures before breaking out the superglue. The pieces are definitely on the fiddly side, but these are also like maybe the first models I've built with genuinely no mold lines. I don't know what sorcery this is. You'll probably see me cleaning up some sprue gates or other contact points, but the casts were clean as can be. Building a set of 4 models took like half an hour, with the only wrinkles being some of the longer flowing pieces like the Taskmage's scroll, which I could never get to fit quite right. We're not going to go through a whole tutorial on how to play the game, but I'll outline a few basics so you can follow along. They made a tutorial series that will link below, and you can check that out if you want to get more specific. Players first pick a quest ranging from treasure hunts to head-to-head skirmishes, and they build their parties. You build your party from a chosen faction, and spend recruitment points to buy models and upgrades. Parties tend to be 3 or 4 models, and players pick a leader, with some models better suited to that role than others. Games are played on a 3x3 map, and you're encouraged to get some terrain on there. Each model has a double-sided card with a full spread of classes, stats, inventory, skills, passive traits, and more. Each character will have access to a number of combat arts which affect how they attack, or spells which give them a bunch of different magic abilities, both of which will have you referring to tables in the rulebook to figure out. It's definitely overwhelming at first, like looking at an RPG character sheet without the context to fully understand it. After picking deployment and determining who goes first, players are designated as the active and reactive player. Both players get activation points which they can use on their models. The active player moves one of theirs, the reactive player can make a reactive action like shooting or dodging with one of their own, and then the active model can perform their own action. After resolving that, the active player can activate another one of their models that still has an activation point, and the sequence keeps going. When the active player has done all the actions they want to do, the next player becomes the active player. Actions aren't limited to combat. There's environmental interaction, trading, and a bunch of other actions in the rulebook, but for a standard skirmish, those are what you'll be doing most of the time. Eldfall Chronicles uses d20s for its rolls, and when you're rolling to see if an action succeeds, you're trying to roll equal to or less than your statistic. For example, one model has an offense stat of 14 and is trying to roll under that to hit their target. They then roll to wound with any successful attacks, where the armor of the target is subtracted from the power of the attack. So if their power is 12 and the target's armor is 4, they need to roll 8s to wound, with any critical hits of 1 going right through that armor. When a model is out of wounds, it's incapacitated. There are also modifiers, cover, dodge rolls, and even opposed rolls called confrontation rolls, which come up when two models attack each other. These involve rolling under your target number to hit, but above what your opponent rolls, which is a bit hard to figure out, unless of course you roll a crit, which ignores all other hits. This might sound like a lot, and that's kinda because it is. The game is more than a little bit complicated at first blush, resembling full party fights between two groups of leveled up RPG characters, with loaded stat sheets, special rules, and inventories to juggle. Every character has multiple combat arts or spells they can pull from, plus passive abilities, active skills, and so on. I played a game with my wife who comes from more of an RPG background, while I'm more of a wargames guy. I set up a simplified variant of the treasure hunt scenario so we could try out some non-combat actions too. Even with that simplified mission, learning the game presented an information overload. Only after playing a turn did we figure out the dozens of abilities our models had, how they interacted with each other, and how that would have changed how we played. While the reactive role of the second player means they can stay more engaged with more things to do, it also means every move is slowed down, as you ask your opponent if they'd like to react, or they carry out the reaction they want to do. It can also lead to feels bad moments, like where she attacked one of my dudes, only for my guy to react, get a lucky crit, and incapacitate her character in her own turn. And that combat has kind of an all or nothing nature to it. You go through the process of rolling under whatever stat you need to hit, then the strength of your attack minus their armor, and that'll often mean you need to roll really low to wound, bouncing off most of the time. When you do cause a wound, most characters only have 1 or 2 hit points, and they get incapacitated. When your characters have all these cool rules and abilities they can use, it feels anticlimactic to just get aced by a lucky arrow from across the board. Part of that is the nature of dice games, of course, but personally, I prefer something a bit more gradual, chipping away at my target instead of either killing them or bouncing off every time. I find that gradual positive feedback to be a lot more engaging. I really wish there was a quick start scenario or some sort of beginner rules. There's a game in here that absolutely has a load of passion and cool ideas in it, but there's just so much stuff to keep track of and figure out that it's hard to even get started. Following the book's advice and starting with a 60-point warband still meant each model had half a dozen skills or abilities to remember, not counting their passive abilities, class, weapons, inventory, and so on. There was a lot of, oh, I could have deployed this guy forward, or oh, I could have done this instead of that, which was absolutely findable, but with such a heavy initial mental load, it was all too easy to miss. If there was some kind of gentler on-ramp to figure this game out, I think we would have had a lot more fun with it. Some of this might be because as the sneaky rogues and caster factions, these might be kinda rough for newcomers to learn, but when looking at combat arts and weapons that have multiple special rules affected by multiple stats, there's a lot of complexity, even in just your regular guy with a sword or a bow. If you want to model an intensely crunchy, Dark Souls-inspired PvP experience, this game could definitely be for you, but for someone looking to just pick up and play a skirmish game, it's gonna be a tough sell without an easier onboarding process. If you'd like to learn more about Eldfall Chronicles, including how we painted the models you saw in this video, head on over to Goonhammer.com for faction overviews, painting tutorials, and more. If you'd like to support our work, you can also consider backing us on Patreon. I've been Combat Art McSpelltable, asking you to react and use the subscribe action in your turn. Thanks for watching.